Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, Paul Brunton, author of The Secret Path, will share a process to help you awaken to intuition and also awakening to the Overself, which he refers to as a higher aspect of the individual's consciousness or higher self, as more commonly known today. This Overself, according to the author, is a transcendent part of oneself that exists beyond the personal ego and ordinary mind. It is the divine spark or the true self that connects individuals to universal consciousness and spiritual truths. And for the most part, this is not tied to religion, but more so to things innate and natural. Yet, for those that can grasp this higher wisdom, the words always fall short, and therefore it is simply ineffable. This Overself is seen as a guiding, wise presence that can be accessed through spiritual practice, through meditation and inner realization. And this can help in attaining higher wisdom and helping one move beyond the superficial ego consciousness and towards a deeper understanding of one's true nature. And again, for the seeker, this leads us right back to the Temple of Delphi as we read the engraved words, "Know thyself." We are now in the third part of a four-part video read series. Each one of these videos can stand alone to impart helpful wisdom and practical tools that you can take with you on this journey called life. It does not matter where you fall on the ladder of service. I believe that what matters most is moving with grace to the next level. We don't need to be a guru, a priest, or a monk. We don't have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, we are. That's simply the most important thing. And I have come to believe that the road to enlightenment is the one each one of us has chosen. I hope you find this content useful. Please leave me a comment. Let me know you are here. And I now turn the page. Chapter 7, The Awakening to Intuition. When the student has finished his breathing exercise, he is ready for the next stage of this practice, the next effort which is asked to put forth. If he has practiced this exercise properly and with success, he will catch the mind like a bird in a net, its constant flight stopped, its restless activity quiet, so that it lies within the net of breath control without a flutter of its wings. He should not attempt to revert back to normal breathing by means of an effort. Rather, should he let his breathing process adjust itself naturally. His mind is now to be withdrawn from concentrating upon the breath and turned away towards the next step, the awakening to intuition. I say to intuition advisedly because the latter is always present on sleeping and needs no awakening. He begins by reverting to the questioning and searching attitude which he adopted during the meditation. But this time, his interrogation is addressed not to the body, desires, or thoughts, but to the mysterious darkness which environs his mind. Who am I? Who is this being that dwells within this body? Let him address these silent questions to himself, slowly, intently, and with utter concentration of soul. Then let him wait for a few minutes, meditating quietly and without effort upon these questions. Thereafter, let him make a silent, humble request, a half prayer if he wishes, directed to the Overself in the very center of his being, to reveal its existence to him. The words in which he formulates his request may be his own, but they should be simple, brief, and direct. Let him ask as though he were addressing an intimate friend, and a true one. Ask and it shall be given unto you, was the direction of Jesus, whose consciousness was purely that of the Overself to his hearers. Having made the request or silently uttered the prayer, let him pause and wait expectantly, even confidently, for a response. I say confidently, yet withal there should be a profound humility in his soul when he is asking for the divine revelation to come to him. Humility is the first step on the secret path, and it will also be the last. For before the divinity can begin to teach him through its own self-revelation, he must first become teachable, i.e., humble. Intellectual ability and learning are admirable things and adorn a man, but intellectual pride puts up a strong barrier between him and that higher life which is ever calling to him, albeit silently. The intellectually proud sit upon their puny pedestals and wait to be worshipped, when all the while there is a deity dwelling in the deeps of their hearts, who is alone worthy to receive worship. The intellectual self seeks to strut like a proud peacock before the admiring gaze of the world. But the true begetter of its talents and creator of our achievements, the one who permeates it with the principle of life and thus permits it to exist, is quite content to remain in the background, unknown and unnoticed by men. It is the hardest of tasks to abase oneself to a realization of one's own littleness, ignorance, and vanity. Yet it is the greatest of attainments, for it leads directly to that finding of the divine life which Christ promised to all who would lose the personal life. We do not need the knowledge and culture of a distinguished mind to understand and appreciate these teachings. The simple and untutored and the primitive can as readily enter into them by an act of faith and prayer, and can more easily enter into the mood of reverence. When we approach the Overself by the path of self-inquiry, the matured studies of the philosopher avail him little over the man in the street. This is not because such studies are valueless. On the contrary, they train the mind in useful habits of abstraction, concentration, and depth. It is because they engender a pride of learning and an egotism of self-importance which erect gates across the true path. The mastery of a dozen different systems of intricate philosophy is not a task for the many, yet the mastery of personal pride is infinitely harder. Humility comes more easily to the illiterate and ignorant because they are conscious of their mental and social inferiority, and humility is essential at every stage of the secret path. The great elemental secrets of life are so simple that few see them. People are complicated. Intellects are complicated, not life. Therefore I say, treasure in your heart and carry in your mind the memorable saying of Jesus that, except you become as a little child, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Tremendous teleological speculations are not necessary to understand the simple truths of the Spirit. Hitherto, all the student's efforts at finding the true self have been positively directed, personally willed, conscious, and voluntary. He is now almost at the point where there should be a complete reversal of procedure, where the personality must cease making any further efforts because it has reached the end of its tether. The whole process of meditation is simply to select this one higher topic of self-inquiry out of the multitude of ideas, to think firmly upon that alone and of nothing else. Then, when the attitude and quality of concentration are thus strongly developed, the student drops even this special line of thinking, withdraws inward and questions who it is that is thinking. He does not endeavor to obtain an answer by thinking about the thinker. He begins to let all thoughts drop away and to fasten his full attention upon becoming aware of this being who has been covered over by the screen of never-ending thoughts. During this pause, which follows his silent request, he should suspend his thoughts so far as he can be adopting an attitude of listening for a response. After waiting for 2 or 3 minutes, he may repeat his request and then pause again. After the second waiting period of 3 or 4 minutes, he may repeat it for a third and final time. Then he should wait patiently, expectantly, for a period of about 5 minutes, his body still, his breathing slow and quiet, his mind becalmed. This ends his meditation. The key to a correct understanding of this stage is in remembering that it is the subconscious reaction to your conscious effort which is now all important. The conscious practice of mental quiet has been useful in sharpening attention. It is like ringing a doorbell. Now you must wait for the subconscious to make its appearance. Do not overstrain. Do not overdo. Give the Overself some credit for intelligence of its own, for action of its own. You may pass through a period when no response comes, when empty nothingness alone reigns supreme within your soul. Before you leave this no man's land of the soul, a feeling of intense loneliness may overcome you. Nevertheless, it will eventually pass away. If you are not prepared to exercise patience while working silently for this revelation, you defeat any possibility of success. Patience is important. We must wait humbly for the revelation of the infinity which is within man. Until that sacred hour, we are poor orphans. Those who introduce any element of impatience into their period of mental quiet are merely handicapping themselves. Henceforth, the student must watch carefully for the first confirmatory signs and tokens that he is upon the right path, the first faint evidences of the stirrings of his deeper self within him. Such signs and tokens are shown us by the soul, but they are often misunderstood or simply not noticed. They come quietly as the sun steals into a darkened world, so quietly that he is likely to dismiss them as useless fantasies, meaningless thoughts, or unimportant imaginings. This would be a great terror. The Overself's voice is first heard like a soft breath, and he must pay full heed to it. The gentlest stirrings within the heart must receive his full and undivided attention, and he must look upon them with respect and veneration as ambassadors from a higher realm. For these quiet monitors are but heralds of a dynamic force which is yet to come and which will transfuse and interpenetrate his body with heavenly power. There are certain subtle tones of feeling, delicate shades of thought, which are usually unnoticed, overlooked, or dismissed in ordinary daily life. These disregarded experiences are the very things the meditator must seize upon for culture and development. He will focus all his power of attention on them whenever they appear, striving to yield himself up to them utterly. In such strange moments he discovers what is almost a second self within. These moments may be rare. He may not even get them except at irregular intervals, but their existence evidences something that is. These ecstatic moments provide a clue to the true nature of man. Within every single one of us lies well upon well of spiritual peace untapped, of spiritual intelligence untouched. From time to time, whispers come to us from this second self, whispers that urge us on to practice self-control, to take the higher path, and to transcend selfishness. We must heed those whispers and exploit those rare moments. They give us glimpses of what we may become. If these moments, when this spiritual perception flashes across us, could be extended, happiness eternal would be ours. For there is something which occasionally makes itself felt in this manner in the mysterious depth of the soul. What it is we hardly know, but what it says we may know. All that is best in thee, that am I, is its silent voice. It is one with us, yet sainted and set apart. The object of this work in mental quiet is to enter into a realm which psychologists often denominate as the unconscious. The response of awakening intuition may come the first time this exercise is practiced, or it may not come until several weeks or even months of daily practice. The student who has completely mastered all the earlier stages is now in a position to benefit markedly by the help of a genuine adept, who can now rapidly bring the intuition to birth for him by certain secret methods. If such a meeting is impossible or impracticable, because the finding of genuine adepts is exceedingly difficult in the modern world, then he must continue to adhere faithfully to the instructions given here. You may considerably assist your development at this stage by beginning to watch yourself at odd times during the day. You may stop yourself almost unexpectedly and observe what you're doing, feeling, saying, or thinking, letting your self-observation be made in a detached, impartial, and impersonal spirit. Who is doing this? Who is feeling this emotion? Who is speaking these words? Who is thinking these thoughts? Put such silent questions to yourself as often as you wish, but put them abruptly, suddenly, and then wait expectantly, quietly, for some intuitive inner response. So far as you can, drop all thoughts during this pause. Such introspective inquiry need not occupy you more than a minute or two at odd times. The placid breathing may profitably be induced in conjunction with this exercise in self-observation and self-inquiry. In this manner, you will begin to break up the complacent attitude which accepts the personal self's body-based outlook, and to free yourself from the illusion that the outer person is the complete being of man. The practice of suddenly observing oneself, one's desires, moods, and actions is especially valuable because it tends to separate the thoughts and desires from the sense of selfhood, which normally inheres in them, and thus tends to keep consciousness from being everlastingly drowned in the sea of the 5 physical senses. Furthermore, it will reinforce in a helpful manner the work which is being done to penetrate the so-called unconscious during the periods of mental quiet. Indeed, it might be said that the 3 practices, self-observation, daily quiet, and placid breathing, are complementary. All aim at overcoming the tendencies towards complete self-identification with the body, the desires, and the intellect, which are today regarded as normal and natural. The human race has yielded to such tendencies since time immemorial, and thus the common identification of self with body has arisen. The cure lies in gradually erasing these tendencies by repeated quest of the true self, the overself, in times of mental quiet, and by constant self-observation at odd times during the day. No matter how deeply fixed in oneself these tendencies are, they can gradually be smoothed away by means of these practices. The intellect, which is repeatedly turned inwards upon this inquiry, yields in time to habit and automatically begins to present our changing emotions, desires, thoughts, and actions to us in the light of the overself, i.e., as things which are being experienced within ourselves, but are merely mechanical responses to external stimuli. One inevitable result of all these practices will be that your attitude towards things, people, and events will gradually change. You will begin to express the qualities which are natural to the overself, the qualities of noble outlook, perfect justice, the treatment of one's neighbor as oneself. Turn your mind repeatedly to that which is the silent spectator within yourself, and fix it there. This inward turning is a mental process, an intellectual activity based on an attitude of self-inquiry, but in the stage which follows, there is a yielding up of all thoughts to the intuitive feeling which arises from within and which leads one's awareness to the innermost. You have always been exercising your intellect and emotions, rarely your intuition. Henceforth, you must begin to change this by bringing your intuitive feeling out of latency as often as possible. It will take time. This search after the right intuition amid the medley of feelings and thoughts which normally compose our inner selves, but persistent inquiry will find it out. There is no moment of the day when you may not profitably divert the current of thought and seek within yourself to ascertain the overself. You must begin to ride the horse of the mind and drive it in an inward direction. You will begin this quest in the ordinary state of spiritual darkness, in the ordinary condition of self-oblivion, the victim of mechanically aroused desires and repulsions. But if you continue with these practices, you will gradually feel your way inwards to greater freedom. There is no happiness for the man who is not free, whether a king imprisoned by his duties in his palace or a convict tied to a prison cell. It is a truism that the soul loves freedom. Here we have a clue to the nature of true happiness. Eternal and unchanging liberty must be a part of its nature, and a liberty of this rare kind can be found nowhere else except in the overself. One proceeds thus by imperceptible degrees to follow thought, back into its unseen home. So long as you are in bondage to thinking, so long does intuition lie beyond your reach. Follow the way of constant self-inquiry, and you will make even thinking serve you as a means to freedom. And the very questions you put yourself will be stepping stones to the questionless state of the Overself. You will better understand the rationale of the threefold practice: mental, quiet, placid breathing, and self-observation, by studying the following picture of man's relation to his Overself. We may say that the person exists by virtue of, through the life force of, and by permission of the Overself. The thoughts and desires and resulting actions of a person are normally almost entirely occupied with things belonging to the external world. We may picture the personal self sitting inside man's body and constantly engaged in viewing the world around through the doorway of the 5 physical sense organs. The result of this preoccupation with outside objects is that it is constantly attracted or repelled, as the case may be, busily thinking, desiring, or setting the body to action, until it has entirely forgotten its place of birth, which is the Overself. Thus it has fallen into the ironical position of a being which has not only lost all memory of its father, but actually denies all the possibility of the very existence of that father. That out of which thoughts arise is the true being of man, the true self. There is an unknown and unnoticed gap between every 2 thoughts, between every 2 breaths, wherein man pauses momentarily for the flimsiest fraction of a second. During that pause, which flashes by with such immeasurable rapidity, he returns to his primal self and rests anew in his real being. If this were not so, if this did not happen thousands of times every day, man could not continue to exist, and his body would fall dead to the ground, an insentient piece of matter. For the Overself is the hidden source of his life. Its force sustains and maintains him, and these constant returns to it enable man to pick up the life power which he needs for living, for thinking, and for feeling. These tiny fragments of time are experienced by everyone, but recognized at their true worth by few. That is eternally. But you, the personal self, exist, come out of it for a time only. Fixing your attention upon the question, who am I? And attempting to pursue its solution with all the ardor you can command, a time will come one day during your half-hour practice of mental quiet when you shall be so deeply engrossed in this effort as to be largely unmindful of what is around you. This condition of intense reverie provides you with the appropriate state wherein the great event of self-revelation can take place. As a matter of fact, to obtain access to one's own soul is not such a rare feat as it may seem. Many prepare the appropriate conditions for it unawares. The artist, when he abstracts his mind from external surroundings in the rapt absorption of his art, does it. He touches ecstasy in a minor measure, forgets himself in his work or vision. It is in this state that geniuses have achieved their finest creations, their best work. When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone, and of good cheer, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come I know not, nor can I force them. Mozart confessed to a friend. The writer, lost in reverie over this theme, his mind sunk so deeply in a single train of ideas that he fails to recognize things, persons, or events that are about him. The painter, so profoundly absorbed in contemplating the picture he is making that he is oblivious of the hours, and above all the musician wrapped in the ardor of musical composition. All these are unconsciously practicing meditation. But you, who follow the path of self-inquiry, are to do it consciously. When Leonardo da Vinci was at a loss for creative ideas, he would look into a heap of ashes and the concentration involved would usually succeed in developing a reverie wherein the ideas he needed were born. A kind of waking trance I have frequently had quite from boyhood when I have been all alone, wrote England's poet laureate Lord Tennyson in a letter to a friend. Out of the intensity of the consciousness of the individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being, and this not a confused state, but the clearest of the clear, the surest of the surest, utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility, the loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction, but the only true life. Tennyson expressed a similar idea in a beautiful verse, quote, "If thou wouldst hear the nameless, and wilt dive into the temple cave of thine own self, there, brooding by the central altar, thou mayst happily learn the nameless had a voice, by which thou wilt abide, if thou be wise." End quote. Sir Isaac Newton late one morning was found sitting half-dressed in bed, sunk in meditation, and on another occasion remained for a long time in his cellar, where a train of thought had taken possession of him while in the act of fetching a bottle of wine for his guests. Lord Kitchener had moods of brown studies, where his eye turned up on their axis as though gazing at the root of his nose. He would then appear quite unaware of what was going on around him. He emerged from these moods in a condition of inspired understanding. As concentration deepens, the external world is slowly forgotten. The mental chambers become empty of every thought save this dominant expectancy of a response from the inner self. It is a species of self-hypnotism, if you like, but it works, and its value is to be judged by its result. At this stage you will cease all striving, you will not try to achieve anything, but rather allow something to be achieved in you. You will let go of the arguing intellect and yield to faith, to holy expectancy, to sublime trust. For henceforth whatever will be done is to be done by divine action, and not your own. You question things no longer, but submit, questionless, to that which is to appeal to your inmost being. Allow this inner being to take possession of you, to take control of you. We instinctively waver and recoil from that mysterious state wherein the senses are almost suspended, but do not fear. Thoughts no longer leap through the mind, but die down into a slow procession as the meditative mood deepens. Silence is God, says a French writer. Yes, but silence of body, of thoughts, of desires, not merely oral silence. In this sublime moment, God is beginning to take possession of your soul. All you have to do is to practice the utmost self-surrender. To sit in this listening quietude, following the thread of intuition, is a strange experience. The world machine seems to slow down, and within this point that is yourself, the absolute begins to emerge. This is the mysterious and momentous hour when the mind first breaks out of its self-created chrysalis. The response to your silent invocation comes at first in the form of a faint and at first impalpable intuition, and in leading, guided by the Ariadne thread of awakened intuition, you are being brought to your own native hearth. Or it may first take shape as a message which will be impressed upon your mind in vivid words. In that case, you will then find a strange temple within yourself, a temple wherein you will be both preacher and hearer. A mysterious condition gradually arises wherein one becomes strangely aware of this otherness. It is as if one part of your nature watches what the other part does. He that finds this sacred unseen threshold is indeed fortunate, for few there be that find it. Yet they are the few who know that man's best and highest wishes fall short indeed of the treasure he is yet to attain, or the vision of a shining symbolic picture may pattern itself before your mind's eye. You may see a cross with a circle standing out in glorious colors, or a radiant five-pointed star, or you may experience nothing more than a melting tenderness in the heart, a gentle sensation of sinking inward into a beautiful rest. Those who spend the years soliciting some intimation or revelation from the august guest within will with time receive a rich reward. A single glimpse of that mysterious stranger takes the troubles out of your life and puts them under our feet. One hallowed word from this oracular lips bestows a bliss which melts our smaller self in cosmical joy. The great De Beer diamond fields of South Africa were discovered through a child picking out of the wall of an old Dutch farm a small colored pebble, out of a wall which for years and years had been passed and repassed many thousands of times by people blind to the treasure of their elbows. How many people have heard the gentle whisper of the inner self or felt its faint guidance, only to brush the visitants aside without understanding? How many have dismissed as mere thoughts the early intimations of diviner life? For this magnetic center deeply buried in the flesh of man, which constitutes his real essential nature, which is the father of all his finer deeds, sometimes reveals its presence in nothing more tangible than such delicate monitions. The greatest truths sometimes come unheralded into the mind. We know only that yesterday we could not accept them, but today we hold them gladly. So it is with a man when the first rays from the sun of immortality begin to fall upon him. You will find, if you yield yourself still further to these sensations, that you will be less inclined to billow the mind with waves of thought, that you will silently give them the command to be still. Thoughts will come and go with increasing slowness. Do not hesitate to let all thinking stop if you can. But this represents a point which is highly advanced, a point which one must not strive for, as in that case only an artificial blankness will ensue. It must and does come of its own accord through the inner workings of the subconscious spiritual self. The stoppage of thought is not necessarily a means of attaining the consciousness of our divine self. If that were so, the epileptics would have the spiritual power of a Christ, and lunatics would possess the wisdom of a Buddha. But what is true is that we have covered over our divine nature with thoughts and desires. Therefore we must proceed to uncover it if we would know it. Hence the difference, and a very vital one, between the lunatic who stares with glassy eyes into vacancy and the mystic who stares with shining eyes into seeming vacancy, is the difference between one who has lost the power to think but has not attained to the knowledge of the inner self, and the one who has conquered the tyranny of thought and can suspend its action at will while consciously being aware of his true spiritual self. Thinking, as we ordinarily know, it is a heavy veil flung over the beautiful face of the divinity within us. Raise the veil a little by letting the mind come to rest as a ship glides into harbor and then is still, and you will perceive somewhat of a beauty you can never forget. Is the conscious sensation of thought really possible? The best answer to this question is an appeal to direct experience. Men who have explored the mind's depths have ultimately reached a point where they have been compelled to stop their search, for their thought has been held in a state of suspension. For the mind may be likened to a wheel in constant motion, and thought is simply the automatic result of this motion. When the wheel is brought to a dead end, all thinking is sure to cease. Many inexperienced people will object that to stop thinking is to stop consciousness. The actual experience of the process reveals that this is not so, that a new and extremely vivid awareness heightens our normal consciousness. We need to differentiate pure consciousness from the faculty of thinking. Death is the secret of life. We must empty ourselves if we would be filled. When the mind has poured out all its thoughts, a vacuum is created. But this can last only for a few seconds. Then a mysterious influx of divine life will enter. This is the descent of the Holy Ghost. It is in this state of conscious cessation of thought that the truth of oneself, heretofore hidden from us by activity, desires, and thoughts, becomes revealed in its sublime and spiritual grandeur. Stop the stream of thoughts, if you can, and gaze steadily at the thinker. Let the intellect take its repose, and watch attentively the vacuum in consciousness which would appear to be left. The Overself consciousness is equivalent to the deep, dreamless sleep state with all its refreshment and peace, but instead of darkness and oblivion, there is complete awareness. If we can only succeed in lifting the veil of unconsciousness which hangs over deep sleep, we may discover the meaning of heaven on earth. And just as all thinking ceases in that state, so for the student entering this condition, all thoughts necessarily come to an end. It is hard for the European mind to conceive of such a state for man where consciousness exists without thought. But by practice and experience, we may verify this. The electron theory of modern science provides us with an apt analogy for the Overself. It represents the atom as a miniature universe resembling our solar system. At the center of this atomic system, we have a charge of positive electricity, round which a cloud of negative electrical charges, the electrons, revolve. The positive and negative charges equilibrate each other, so that the atom does not ordinarily break up. Thus there is a positive charge at rest at the center, and there are negative charges in motion round about that center. The point of absolute rest round which the electrons revolve may be likened to the true self, and the electrons to its appurtenances, intellect, emotion, body. The Overself of man is changeless. To find the soul is simply to recur to our original state. Purely divine beings we were in some far-off past, but untrammeled by the coverings of thought and body. Divine beings we are yet, but these later coverings have caused us to forget who we are. Hence, to pierce through them is to see our proper self. We must experience ourselves as we really are, not as prisoners in the body, as captives in the cage of thoughts or fettered by fleeting passions. Our consciousness is pinned down by these various forms. The whole art of meditation and concentration consists of unlocking our chains and raising up as free spirits. In an old Indian writing, I read the lines, quote, "Because I had forsaken unity with thee, because I, fool, had made my body me, because I did not know thee who didst dwell in me, therefore I wandered through raging hells, because I threw away my very self, I therefore was in chains." End quote. The discovery of a new cinema star is hailed through the press of the entire world as a great event, but the discovery of a man's spiritual self takes place in utter silence, without the world's praise or its printed record. This path leads on to abiding quietude. Deeper and deeper must we penetrate, with focused mind, until we enter the realm where this blessed quietude reigns. A great peace will slowly invade your inner being. A strange, holy quietness will increasingly make itself felt. You will know that you are coming into the aura of the true self by the experience of a happy feeling. This is but the initial stage. The last is to have ecstatic union. Little by little, all the impressions of your immediate surroundings will be cut away. The world and its affairs will begin to recede, for when our minds are withdrawn from the hurried turmoil of our times and find their native state in such quiet moments, they become starred with sublime peace. As we pass into the inmost center of our mind, we arrive at a state where thought itself stops still, and where there seems at first to be nothing except the blissful consciousness of being, the sublime repose in infinite existence. This is the self that we really are, the Overself. Turning away from the world, I have forgotten both caste and lineage. My weaving is now in the infinite silence. Kabir, having searched and searched himself, hath found God within him. These lines were written many hundreds of years ago by Kabir, the poet weaver of Benares. When in our meditations we seek to trace out the true I and not merely sink in slothful acceptance of its manifold mask, we eventually arrive at an inner state which is really the most interesting in life. It is not unconsciousness, it is not sleep, it is not dream. Within its strange clasp, we become conscious of an intense awareness of infinitude. Entry into this condition temporarily transfigures a man's entire nature. We discard the petty and personal and discover our illimitable and divine nature. When we retired into the citadel of the soul, the moving panorama of sense impressions begins to fade out of sight. As we enter intimately into ourselves, the picture of the world which held us enchanted and robbed us of true self-consciousness begins to disappear. When we put the mind in repose and recollect who we are, our effort needs no further reward. We have secured balm for the day, and all life looks good. When the human mind stops its incessant action, when it empties itself of every image and idea, then does it become a clear mirror in which the ineffable divinity reflects itself. Our grave and learned skeptics will tell us that these spiritual ecstasies are mere derangements of the nervous system. Their cold brothers, the medicos, may likewise affix some such label as excessive blood pressure or whatnot. Others will mistake these records for the introspective musings of a solitary dreamer. But rather than reject these glimpses of the glorious possibilities of man with the contemptuous prejudice of misunderstanding, it were better for them to admit that they are too strange for their wits to follow, and thus quietly dismiss them for the while. Men may sit in solemn conclave to investigate these assertions, as some will. They would be wiser, however, if they investigated their own selves, for the experience of the eternal being within is its own best proof. It is in this strange manner that man who follows this path of self-analytical meditation first awakens to the guidance of his intuition. When he begins to feel the in-leading that will surely arise in the depths of his being, when he begins to yield himself utterly to it and lets it draw his consciousness still further into himself, when he willingly surrenders his personal thoughts, memories, and feelings, and lets them drown in the impersonal current of life, which has mysteriously arisen of its own accord. When he submits to this profound guidance, he will be led right across the threshold of his self-knowledge into the inner chamber where his real self awaits him. Once he gets even a momentary experience of this kind, he will understand something of what I mean when I speak of the spiritual being of man. He will realize that he has passed into a wonderful condition without the use of the five senses, without dreaming even, into something that is real and transforming, and which he has never before experienced. In the cathedral-like silence of the soul, he will feel that merely to think is to make a sacrilegious noise. In this lofty mood, when he discovers the presence of his diviner self, he realizes he can best pay for the privilege by gathering all thoughts into a heap upon the sacred altar and sacrificing them. In this strange moment, the intellect temporarily cremates itself, and out of its ashes rises the phoenix of the true self, the imperishable Overself of man. Chapter 8. The Awakening to the Overself. Whoever has patiently practiced the exercises in meditation prescribed in this book and has thereby won through to the inner contact with his diviner self will no longer need to repeat these exercises in the identical manner which he has heretofore followed. The minute analysis of self, which has been the burden of his oft-repeated efforts, becomes unnecessary and is eventually replaced by a more or less swift indrawing of the mind, which occurs soon after the student has put himself in silence and composed his thoughts. That is to say, once having arrived at the strong inner conviction that body, emotion, and intellect are not himself, he need no longer repeat the technique of self-analysis in his meditations. He need only practice the breathing exercise which has been given and then place his mind in the half-question, half-prayer condition which is described in the preceding chapter. After the necessary pause, the waiting period of humble expectancy, the response of the Overself will usually be forthcoming, and he will temporarily enter the state of partial or complete inner illumination. For a brief while, he will stand still in the center of his being, letting go completely of the frets and frictions of personal life, and returning to conscious integrality. The stream of mental quiet has at last carried him beyond the intellect. I shall not take the traveler on the secret path far across this threshold. Whatever happens to him henceforth will be an individual matter, and if he has had the courage and patience to come thus far, he will draw to himself the right guidance he may further need. Few ever cross far into this mystic realm, but most adventurers linger on the threshold, content with its seraphic brightness, its spiritual warmth, and its unutterable peace. But it is now necessary to utter a warning. If in the foregoing outline of the secret path I have given the impression that self-knowledge is a subject which one masters merely by practicing certain exercises, obeying certain rules, and studying certain ideas, precisely as one masters a mundane subject like physical culture, the student would not have formed a true concept of what is required. So strangely subtle and peculiarly delicate are the moods which he has to invoke, that something more than conforming to a prescribed system is required, and that final but important ingredient he himself is powerless to supply. The awakening to spiritual consciousness is something which cannot be developed by a mechanical and measured system alone. Art happens, declared Ruskin, and so does spirituality. The aspirant carries on certain practices, whether meditation or relaxation, whether self-observation or self-remembering, carries on his effort of interrogative reflection, and one day the true consciousness seems to come to him, quietly, gently but surely. That day cannot be predetermined. It may come early in his efforts, it may come only after long years of disappointing struggle, for it depends upon a manifestation of grace from the Overself, of a force deeper than his personal will, which now begins to take a hand in this celestial game. Once the grace gets to work upon a man, there is no escape. Quietly, gradually, but perceptibly, it draws him inwards. The word grace is not one I am over keen to use. It has so many unpleasant and inaccurate theological connotations that, could I but find a better, I would throw it aside. But I cannot. So I shall endeavor to assign it a meaning based on ascertainable spiritual experience and not on blind belief. Grace is the essential prerequisite for enlightenment, yet you cannot supply it. Only your Overself or a true adept can do that. Grace may fall with astonishing and unexpected celerity on a man who has lived what the world would call a sinful life, and change his heart, mind, and consciousness very rapidly. Grace may withhold itself from a man who has spent 20 years studying tome after tome upon religion and philosophy. Its operation is often obscure, sometimes sudden and mysterious, and not infrequently a secret to other men. Yet, for all this, it is not an arbitrary force. It possesses its own laws and ways of working, but only a true adept is in position to ascertain them all. To obtain this grace, we must ask for it. This is not to say that the asking is done by verbal action alone. That may suffice for some. For others, the request may be uttered mentally only. But for most of us, we must ask with our whole life. Our course of action, our sacrifices of the primrose path, our surrender of time even, should show and express this great desire. And we may even be forced down on our knees at unexpected hours of the night or day to pray that the light be granted us. If this happens, do not resist or resent it. Yield, and if you feel an urge to weep when praying for the Overself's grace, then let the tears flow as copiously as they come forth. Do not hold them back. There is a great spiritual merit in weeping for the visitation of a higher power. Each tear will dissolve something that stands between you and the divine union. Never be ashamed of such tears, for they fall in good cause. I have heard a few who win grace without toil and sacrifice. Those few who receive it seemingly as a sudden gift dropped from the skies provide no exception to the rule of asking. Only their aspiration was uttered and heard in former existences in earlier body births. Destiny has something to do with the matter and provides her detailed explanations of apparently erratic behavior only to those keen souls who have won her secret. When grace arises from our own overself, the latter sets up a certain urge in the heart and begins to lead our thoughts in certain channels. We become dissatisfied with our life as it is. We begin to aspire to something better. We commence a quest for higher truth than the belief which has hitherto held us. We imagine, and naturally, that the change is due to a developing mind or sometimes to changing circumstance. But not so. Veiled behind the mystery that is life moves the unseen Overself, the august being who has thus strangely interrupted our mortal sleep. The very quest for truth was simply a quest for the Overself. Mayhap we find a worthier philosophy of life and thus come a little closer to true self-realization. But the uplifting thoughts and moods of that changing period, whether a week or years, are merely a manifestation of grace, or if I may put it paradoxically, the results of an inner movement made by the motionless. Hard to grasp this truth that the aspirational call must come to us. We do not stir it into sound of our own accord. We must cast ourselves prostrate at the feet of the real self and pray for its grace. When the fire of divine aspiration awakens in our hearts, we may know that some modicum of grace has been granted to us. We who are servitors of that high King must wait upon his mood. Grace is a gift, a favor to be received at the hands of the God within. It cannot descend at any arbitrary moment, however. It usually comes when the necessary bodily, environmental, and experiential conditions are ripe. The Spirit takes its own time, not ours. For, from a quote by Matthew Arnold, "We cannot kindle, when we will, the fire which in the heart resides. The Spirit bloweth and is still, in mystery the soul abides." End quote. The ripening of the soul for this profound experience of union with the Overself takes place gradually, as does the ripening of a fruit. But once the growth is complete, the union overwhelms the soul with sudden downpouring, and man is really born anew. There are certain root experiences which a man never forgets. The first day he loves a woman is one of them. The first day he lands on a foreign shore is another. And the first time he breaks the chrysalis of being to emerge as a conscious spiritual unit is a third. And it is the greatest of all. The Overself makes no demand of man other than that he open his inner eyes and perceive its existence. Yet the day of that vision is the most starred day of his whole life, for on that day he stands on the edge of eternity. For this he was really born, and not merely to mend shoes or traffic in figures. If he misses this divine experience, even then nature will not let him escape. She is in no hurry, however. Somewhere in her spacious realm she will yet catch him and compel him to fulfill her secret purpose. Whoever engages in such inward exploration is no dreamer. He merely antedates today what the multitude of men who will have perforce to do tomorrow. Memorable is the grandeur of that august moment when he first beholds the divinity which environs him, but which, paradoxically, is also at the kernel of his being. In the ecstasy of quietude, as Rupert Brooke called it, he learns to know what he truly is. As James Rhodes expressed in a beautiful verse from Out of the Silence, "I am thy dawn, from darkness to release. I am the deep, wherein thy sorrows cease. Be still, and know that I am God. Acquaint thyself with me, and be at peace. Erase that record of the palimpsest within thee, by the scribe of time impressed, and on the smooth surface write anew, I am all wisdom, righteousness, and rest. I am alone, thou only art in me. I am the stream of life that flows through thee. I comprehend all substance, fill all space. I am pure being, by whom all things be. Yes, I am spirit, in thy depths I dwell. Art conscious of my presence, all is well. Cleave but to that, thyself art thine own heaven. End of quote. Once we push the gate of the mind slightly ajar and let the light stream in, the meaning of life becomes silently revealed to us. The gate may be open for 1 minute or for 1 hour, but in that period we discover the secret, and neither weary time nor bitter woe can tear that priceless knowledge away from us. Words fall dead when I try to express that meaning, but whoever has felt his whole inner being melt away and dissolve into the mysterious infinite during such meditation, as a result of constant aspiration or by the grace of some adept, will understand this thought I am feebly trying to convey. In the still presence of that mighty power, the soul walks on tiptoe. It is the most wonderful moment in a man's or a woman's life, this illumination of the heart and mind. Find yourself, your overself, and you will begin to find the meaning of life and begin to unveil the mystery of the universe. Back of each one of us there is this overself, calm as an unruffled sky, wise with the gathered experience of nature's many million years of existence, strong with a power to bring you the best which life has to offer. Let me recall the words of one who was perfectly aware of it, a humble carpenter turned teacher, and who wandered along the shores of Galilee with a few disciples over 1900 years ago. He told them, "Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." These words are as true today as they were then. The man God who spoke them is seemingly gone from our midst, but the divine truths to which he gave voice will always remain with mankind. Those of us who have taken this peep through the door of our own being are dumbfounded. We draw back, surprised, at the inscrutable possibilities of the overself. Man as a spiritual being possesses a capacity for wisdom which is infinite, a resource of happiness which is startling. He contains a divine infinitude within himself, yet he is content to go on and potter about a petty stretch of life as though he were a mere human insect. When a man reaches the apex of truth, he is able to enjoy his own being, to gain from within that happiness which he has hitherto sought amid external things. Truth, beauty, peace, power, and wisdom are all attributes of the overself, that self which awaits our finding. The divine self imparts whatever of idealism, insight, and nobility is present in us. We have yet to learn the true meaning of the verb to be. In the deeps of our miraculous being, we may discover that we are parts of a great life whose condition is peace eternal, whose purpose is utterly benevolent, and whose existence can never perish. Yes, this is the true home state of every man. This timeless condition in which we discover ourselves has been beautifully described by the Hindu sages as the eternal now. Who knows his own nature knows heaven, declared Mencius, the Chinese disciple of Confucius. The spirit self of man remains unaltered and undisturbed in all its grandeur, while his personal self passes through the greatest vicissitudes of fortune. It is the indestructible element in him, the silent and eternal witness to whom he must one day come and render homage. It is a light which no power can extinguish. It is man's immortal spirit, benign and tolerant, beautiful and unchanging. We are as close to the God within as we ever shall be. All we need to do is to know this by experiment and experience. The soul broods in secret over its great treasure. Let us come to rest in the center of our being and discover the diamonds and rubies that are hid. The Overself is the true being, the divine inhabitant of this body, the silent witness within the breast of man. Man lives every moment in the presence of this divine self, but the membrane of ignorance hangs over him and covers sight and sense. This doctrine is one of the most difficult to justify. How explain to mortal, troubled man that the spiritual self can exist serenely apart, self-sufficing, untouched, and untrammeled by any external condition? I fear this statement must look foolish to one who quakes at sight of misfortune or brightens at tidings of external good. How dare I tell him that he is self-hypnotized into despair or elation, and yet that he remains paradoxically free of both? The man of the world will ridicule this assertion, while the theologian may reject it. There is but one final answer to this puzzling riddle, one supreme authority to whom it can be referred for solution, and that is the authority of one's personal experience, one's own first-hand realization that these things are true. Knowledge of the self is the absolute and all-essential basis for knowledge of the truth. Our first and foremost thought is of self in the sense of I. Trace this thought down to its source, and when you have found that in which it arises, you will have found the Overself, truth, wisdom, God. Some will object that the inner shrine is shrouded in darkness and that the way thereto is impassable. No, we must not be intimidated by such fears. The sanctuary is not impenetrable, and if few appear to have found it in these days, it is because few have begun to search for it. Truth is written into the organism of man no less surely than into the inspired books. In the spacious society of the universe, man possesses a better status than he is yet aware of. Mostly in moments of secret mental quiet are hints brought to him concerning the grandeur which is native to the soul. This wisdom is the oldest wisdom in the world, for back as our foremost minds can peer, before the first pen was ever put to paper, ages beyond Buddha and Zoroaster, this single and simple truth that man can consciously unite with the divine while in the body was taught to those who aspired. The universality of the experience which I have described is authentic testimony to its reality. The literatures of all lands, the philosophies and religions of all times bear witness to its truth. It appears in the pages of Grecian Plato and American Emerson. It is to be found in the philosophies of Roman Porphyrius and German Fichte. It halos the sayings of Syrian Jesus and lights the words of Indian Buddha. To the real seer, all creeds come alike. Those who profess the faith of Buddha are no less welcome than those who profess the faith of Christ. The entertaining of a single thought of a certain elevation makes all men of one religion. It is always some base alloy that creates the distinction of sex. Thought meets thought over the widest gulf of time with unerring Freemasonry. I know, for instance, that Sadi entertained once identically the same thought that I do, and hereafter I can find no essential difference between Sadi and myself. He is not Persian, he is not ancient, he is not strange to me. By the identity of his thoughts with mine, he still survives, said Henry David Thoreau with truth. Different people in different lands have given this secret experience different names. Some Christians have called it union with God, while Hindu saints name it union with the spirit self. Some philosophers describe it as merging into the infinite, and others as finding truth. The label is not important. The wise will never quarrel over it, for words hint at but cannot describe the fullness of this experience. Hindu and Hebrew mystic, Platonic and Pythagorean philosopher, Chinese and Christian moralist all speak the same language and talk in the same tones if we but hear them aright. No matter how different are the creeds, nor how numerous the theologies may be, God was, is, and can be but the primal one. Truth is the spiritual white light which falls upon the prism of mankind and breaks into the many colors whereby individuals interpret it. Thus the experience of discovering it is the same the world over. What differs is the interpretation thereof. Some will object that the world has received a bewildering array of reports from its mystics, from those who claim to have gone inwards, yet return with varying accounts of what they have experienced, witnessed, felt, and understood. The admixture of religious dogmas and the misinterpretation of personal experiences have produced the bewildering mass of doctrines which, in the lump, is called mystical. The inability to adopt a strictly scientific attitude towards the whole matter is responsible for the obfuscation of meditation's first object. Various paths have been devised to secure this object, but a multitude of narrow minds have mistaken the path for the goal. Meditation, yoga, mysticism, etc. have only one fundamental purpose, whatever prejudice exponents or mistaken adherents may say. That purpose is to short-circuit the currents of thinking so that one may perceive the reality which thought obscures. In other words, advanced religious practices, methods of meditation, ecstatic worship, etc. are all means to help man slow down the stream of thoughts until he eventually stops flow completely. Sectarian mentalities will, of course, vehemently object to this, but their denial is simply a denial of the true facts. Mature and penetrating souls alone can perceive this truth. They alone, by clarifying their understanding of this subject, can escape from the spiritual fog wherein most students and devotees habitually move. They alone know that the particular religious path anyone follows has less to do with his attainment than the mechanical method of mind control he unconsciously practices. They alone know that the absence of any creed whatsoever from his beliefs makes a man no less successful than his more pious brother. What the advanced Indian yogi experiences as nirvana is substantially the same condition as what the advanced Christian mystic experience as God. If either, in recording or describing this sublime state, tacks onto it theological or logical doctrines peculiar to his race or land, we must ascribe these excretions to their true source, the personal prejudices or mental bias of the seer, and not to the illumination itself. Illumination, in its varying degrees, is the same for all men alike. Every mystic rediscovers the same hidden treasure, but his description of it may be lamentably different because his intellectual and emotional interpretation of it is different. There are degrees of illumination itself, and in the most advanced degree, all seers obtain the same experience and agree perfectly in its understanding, but such are the rare few, the gifted immortals among men. Temporary glimpses and experiences of a mystical nature have occurred in every century and in every land, but intelligent interpretation of these experiences is not so plentiful. The kindergarten alphabet of every creed has been dragged in to explain them, and that which descends out of the universal and infinite is chained to some local symbol. Our time demands a sensible and spiritual explanation of these things, not an unscientific and religio-materialistic one. Visionaries have recorded perfectly genuine experiences, both psychic and spiritual, yet they differ widely in their results. Why? Because the beliefs with which they started out, the past experiences which have influenced their personalities, all these have influenced the interpretation of their results. The interpretation may be unsound, therefore, when the inner experience is quite valid. We make the mistake of attempting to erect a circumscribing fence around this divine discovery. Through all ages, genuine seekers, but with narrow minds or little experience, have tried to force this wide ocean of truth knowledge into a small compound of doctrine or creed. It cannot be done. And when their experience deepens, they themselves come to realize that this is so. But the frowns of Orthodox churches or the difficulty of explaining such subtle truth to the multitude often compels their silence. Creeds come and go. Cults arise and slowly disappear. Sects take the whole world's stage for a time, but must ultimately make their exit. Yet the ancient wisdom, stripped of its trappings of external expression, remains forever identical and unchanged. It is independent of race. Witness Thoreau among the Americans and Sankara among the Hindus. It is apart from the centuries. Rabindranath Tagore today and Meister Eckhart over 600 years ago. It is unaffected by climate. The fur-wrapped Tibetan hermit Milarepa, dwelling on an icy plateau, ultimately arrives at the same truth as Plotinus living in warmer climed Egypt. The same inward experience informed the beautiful Persian poems of Jalaluddin Rumi, as inspired the haunting Christian verses of Francis Thompson. The inspirations of early Rome parallel the inspiration of early China. Similarities in all these are startling. Thoughts are identical, but the vestures of those thoughts are necessarily object to personal taste and racial customs. The simple and beautiful sayings of Jesus carry the burden of truth's essential message. Study them well, and you shall find they correspond completely with the sayings or writings of other men who are at one with the Overself. All the masters of deep spiritual realization speak alike. Only the stumbling followers and professional theologians disagree and differ. Do you imagine that God showed himself to men only in those far-off days when Christ stirred up an obscure corner of the Roman Empire, or when Buddha walked with the begging bowl? If God cannot show himself again today, then his power has become strangely circumscribed and the absolute has suddenly shrunk back to the finite. Is it not better to believe that he is ready to reveal himself to all who care to fulfill the conditions precedent to revelation? The Eternal has spoken to man in the past and can speak to him again. Who can explain the spell which men like Christ and Buddha flung over their auditors by means of a few words? Oratorical genius cannot explain it. Intellectual genius cannot explain it. Something more than these things is required to make plain why their silent glances moved stony hearts, which no eloquent perorations were ever likely to move, some mysterious possession of a power at once awe-inspiring and divine. For centuries, erudite scholars have trained their searchlights upon the story of Jesus. They have examined minutely every shred of information about him, every source and every document that might make their vision of the mysterious Galilean a little clearer. And now, nearly 2,000 years after the death of the inspired Jew, he remains still an enigmatic and unfamiliar figure. His biography is still largely imaginative. His personality has been pictured in 1,000 contradictory ways. His teachings have been used to buttress opposing institutions. Yes, though the world still writes the name of this wonderful man with a certain veneration, still holds his high above every other name in the West, he remains a mystery. The unaided intellect of man can never solve this mystery. Out of the divine infinite, he came to the tribes of men, gave his sacred words, and was gone. Such was the outer picture. For Christ descended on earth from a superior planet, which was his real home, and which is far ahead of ours in spiritual consciousness, to bless and serve men by his presence. This descent was his real cross, his real crucifixion. And those who sincerely seek him may still find him in their hearts. But divinity was not buried in the tomb with Jesus. Have no holy voices spoken since then? Can we not search history for the past 2,000 years and find the names of a few men whose presence and look testify to lofty spiritual attainment? Is not the deeper life always extending its sublime invitation to us? Why should we hide these simple truths under complicated jargon? Why should we dress this beautiful figure of truth in coarse sackcloth? Men like Buddha and Jesus did not disdain to expound their thought in clear-cut phrase and to explain their meaning in simple words. The profounder thoughts can be simply expressed. It is not at all necessary to put them into prose of Cimmerian mystery. Yet there are those who delight in using a vocabulary and phraseology which build barriers between truth and its mental understanding. The stake and gallows and the cross once waited for the spiritual pioneers who dared to utter heterodoxic thoughts. Hence, a jargon of obscure and guarded terminology grew up among some who walked this lone path. But there is no justification in this 20th century for the weird jargon of medieval days still current in certain circles. The highest truths can now be revealed without fear of the hanging rope or the torture rack. Why frighten simple truth-seekers by piling up complicated mysteries? In former times, this interior path and its results were described in published books under poetical, symbolical, and allegorical phrases. Such a style was of use to the intuitional who were able to read therein something which the unenlightened man could never perceive. In the present era, the time has come to speak more openly and more plainly of these matters. We live in an intellectual and scientific age when a set of teachings must be presented in a manner which will appeal to the ordered intelligence of men. Any other kind of presentation will cause such teachings to be treated as poetry, as a decoration for spare moments. The prevalence of science and the popularization of knowledge have fostered man's intellect. Therefore, a modern expression of truth must, at the least, make as strong an appeal to his mind as to his heart. The needs of the brain cannot be despised by any spiritual message nowadays, though they should never be permitted to play the despot. We who have had first-hand experience of the amazing potentialities of meditation must be ready to meet the doubter on his own ground, and to free him who is a prisoner of the primitive conceptions that man is nothing more than his material body, and that the world was formed from nothing more than the primeval mud. It is not enough to tell him that our stars burned a little brighter at our births. We must show him how he can kindle a greater light for himself too. If still he insists on shutting his eyes to the possibilities of man's life here and now, he will have no excuse for the spiritual darkness which environs him. Yet there is little that is radically new here in the historical sense. Only the synthesis and proper proportioning of these thoughts will appear fairly fresh with this book. But everything that has not been tried out is new, and these things have not been tried by the world at large. The trained modern intelligence demands, and must receive, a better presentation of truth than the mere aspirations of religio-moral sentimentality. We must remember, too, that the teachers who came in the past came to peoples whose mentalities were unlike our own, and came at times when the economic problems of industrial civilization had not become so heavy as to press down upon all others. They came to Eastern peoples who are naturally more sensitive than our own, whose minds are less skeptical and less restless, and whose hearts are habitually turned towards religious devotion. It must therefore be clear that the seers of today, and of the West especially, should forget the presentations of the past in order to remember the needs of the present. Hence, they will seek to give out expressions of truth suited to the times. Such expressions are already taking shape in various movements and cults, however partial they may be. So, too, in this teaching of spiritual self-inquiry, it is needful to show what worth and value it possesses for those who are held captive by the perpetual agitation of modern life, and what practical application may be made of its fundamental principle that the real self of man is divine. Meet me at the next video now, where we're going to learn how to get spiritual help in material affairs. If you haven't done so yet, please do hit the like button, share this with family, with friends of like mind, and subscribe to the channel.